The night was cold, the kind of cold that seeped through your jacket and made your bones ache. Officer Luke Marshall was out on patrol, his SUV crawling along a muddy back road when suddenly, the tires sank deep into the sludge. He cursed under his breath. No signal, no way to call for help, not in this weather. Rain hammered down, drumming against the windshield like a warning. He was about to reach for his radio when a sound cut through the storm. Barking. Faint at first, then louder. Luke squinted through the rain and froze. Out of the darkness came not one, but 3 tiny German shepherd puppies. Their fur was drenched, their little bodies shivering, yet their eyes burned with urgency. They didn't bark at him. They barked past him, as if calling him to follow, and then they bolted into the woods. Something in his gut told him to go. So he did. The deeper he went, the darker it became, mud sucking at his boots with every step. Then, his flashlight caught something, a shape tied to a tree. His heart sank. A German shepherd, the mother, barely clinging to life. Her ribs showed through her soaked fur, and around her neck, a frayed rope dug deep. But what stopped him cold was the note pinned to the tree. "She saved my life. I couldn't save hers." Luke stared at the words, rain dripping from the paper like tears. Who wrote it? Why leave her here to die? And why, deep down, did Luke feel like he was meant to find them, that some unseen hand had guided him to this very spot? What happened next would break him open and make him believe in second chances all over again. That night, Maple Hollow was drowning in an autumn storm. Pine trees bent under the weight of the wind, gravel roads disappeared under rushing water, and the forest stood like a wall of shadows. By the time Luke had turned off Route 14 onto Pinebrook Trail, visibility had dropped to nothing. The storm had come fast, and now, it was about to change everything. Luke sat behind the wheel, shoulders rigid, the tension in his frame coiled tight like a wire about to snap. Years of fieldwork had carved him into something lean and deliberate, a man who had seen too much and spoken too little. Rain streaked across the windshield in heavy sheets, and the wipers beat a frantic rhythm, but the storm outside wasn't the one that troubled him most. It was the one inside, silent, relentless. His jaw was sharp, his hair cropped neat beneath the patrol cap, though the stubble shadowing his chin betrayed the grind of endless shifts. The uniform clung to him in crisp lines, still holding its form even after hours in the rain. But his eyes told the truth. Gray. Steady. Hollow. The kind of eyes that carried ghosts. He hadn't always been this way. Once, he was more than the badge, more than the gun. A husband. A father. Until the night everything burned down in a blaze of headlights and shattered glass. One drunk driver. One red light. One little boy who never made it home. Since then, Luke had lived in a fortress of silence. No family. No friends. Not even a dog to greet him at the door. Nothing that could be lost again. The road dipped under his tires, slick and narrow. Then came the jolt, a hard pull to the right. The SUV lurched as the front wheel sank deep into mud. Luke cursed under his breath, tried reverse. The engine groaned, tires spun, mud fanned in dark arcs, but the vehicle only dug deeper, anchored like a stone in quicksand. He grabbed the radio. Unit 3 to dispatch. I'm stuck out on Pine Brook Trail, east of the mill cutoff. Need a tow. Static filled the pause, then a voice broke through. Deputy Nate Owens, young and eager, the way rookies always were when they thought they were speaking to a legend. Luke hated that word. Copy that, Unit 3. Closest tow is 40 minutes out. Roads are a mess tonight. Luke clicked off with a dry acknowledgement, clipped the mic back, and stepped out into the storm. The cold slapped him hard, the kind that cuts bone deep. Mud sucked at his boots, thick and hungry, as rain carved icy tracks down his face. He swung a flashlight in slow arcs across the tree line. Darkness stared back. Until something broke it, a sound sharp and unexpected. Barking. High-pitched. Not one voice, but 3, rising and falling like an urgent chorus. Luke froze, beams swinging toward the noise. They stood just beyond the road, 3 tiny German Shepherd pups, drenched to the skin, trembling beneath the weight of the storm. No more than 5 weeks old. The smallest stood its ground, eyes round, barking as if it could take on the world. Scout. That's what Danny would have called it. The second was taller, legs strong, pacing in restless bursts, scanning the shadows like a soldier on watch. Bolt. And the last, soft-eyed, one ear flopped low, a limp in its step, Muffin. Luke's breath itched. He hadn't thought of those names in 2 years, not since the drawings scattered across the kitchen table, the way his son spoke of dogs he'd never meet as if they were already family. The pups barked again, spinning, darting into the woods, then stopping to look back. Waiting. Calling. Luke stared after them, heart thundering, pulse crashing in his ears like the rain on the canopy. Coincidence? Maybe. But it didn't feel like one. He tightened his grip on the flashlight and followed. Not because he had to. Because he couldn't not. The forest swallowed him whole. Rain sluiced through branches, the ground slick with roots and puddles that clung to his boots like claws. The beam of light jerked with every stride, catching glimpses of fur just ahead. Scout yipped the loudest, dancing in and out of sight. Bolt cut through brush like a little warrior. Muffin limped but never wavered, pausing every few steps to glance back, making sure he was still there. They weren't lost. They were leading him somewhere. And Luke, a man hollowed out by grief, kept walking, deeper and deeper, drawn by 3 fragile lives that felt like echoes of a boy he once loved beyond measure. The rain pressed harder, drumming on leaves like a relentless drumbeat, but Luke didn't slow. The forest seemed endless, a twisting maze of shadows and whispers, yet all he could hear were those barks, sharp, insistent, pulling him towards something he didn't yet understand. And for the first time in 2 years, Luke felt something stir inside him. Not fear. Not pain. Something he thought had died the night his son did. Hope. Luke could hardly believe where his boots were taking him. Through a storm-beaten forest, chasing the sound of tiny paws and sharp barks. Rain soaked him to the bone, his breath clouding in the cold as the flashlight beam carved shaky paths through the tangle of wet branches. Every step felt heavier, yet he didn't stop. Something inside told him this wasn't just chance. It felt like being pulled towards something he'd been running from for years. Then he saw it. A shape hunched low at the base of a twisted cedar, barely more than a shadow against the earth. Not a branch. Not debris. It moved, slow, faint, breathing. The pups bolted ahead, their barking rising into an urgent chorus as they swarmed the figure. Luke followed, boots sinking deep into the mud until the light fell fully across her. A German Shepherd. Full-grown, but barely hanging on. Her fur, once rich and thick, was slicked flat with mud and rain. Her left ear stood alert, but the right was bent and torn. Her frame was gaunt, ribs pressing against her skin. One hind leg bore an angry wound where a rope had bitten deep, chafing raw against flesh. She trembled, too weak to stand, tethered cruelly to the tree by a frayed blue nylon rope. Luke crouched slowly, heart pounding against the storm's rhythm. The dog's amber eyes locked on his, a low growl curling from her throat, not fierce, just worn and protective. She wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for them. His light traced the rope to where it ended, tied to a rock-weighted plastic bag. Something white peeked from underneath, a piece of paper, folded and damp. He kept his movements calm, his voice low. "Easy, girl. I'm not here to hurt you." Muffin moved first. The smallest pup, limping but determined, stepped between her mother and Luke. She sniffed his outstretched hand, then nudged her wet forehead against his palm. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Scout pressed close to his mother's belly, licking her muzzle. Bolt circled like a sentry, pausing now and then to glance at Luke, watchful and wary. Luke reached for the note. The paper clung to his fingers, edges soft from the rain, but the words cut sharp. "She saved my life. I couldn't save hers. I'm sorry." He stared longer than he should have, not just at the ink but at the weight behind it. Whoever left her here hadn't done it in cruelty. They'd done it in surrender. His flashlight dipped, catching Shadow's eyes, because that's what she felt like to him, even before the name crossed his mind. She didn't flinch when he shifted closer, didn't growl again. Just watched, chest rising in shallow breaths, as if deciding whether to trust him. "Let me help," he murmured. The pup stayed close, forming a barrier of fur and fragile trust. Muffin leaned against his leg like she belonged there. Luke slid a multi-tool from his pocket and bent to the rope. Each cut made her shudder, but she didn't move, as if she'd given her strength to the last fight she had. When the final strand split, the tension bled from her body. She sank slightly, head lowering, no longer bound. Luke slipped off his soaked jacket and laid it across her back. She didn't resist. The pups pressed tighter against her, a tangle of warmth in the freezing rain. His voice cracked through the radio. "Unit 3 to dispatch." Static. Then, "Go ahead." Luke steadied his breath. "I found them. One adult shepherd, 3 pups. Abandoned. Adult is injured, abrasions on hind leg, possible infection, malnourished. Requesting immediate veterinary assistance." A pause, then Nate's voice again, stripped of its earlier nerves. "Copy that. Sending GPS now. Vets on standby." Luke rose, scanning the clearing. No shelter. No food. No trace of mercy, just the remnants of someone's last hope left to drown in the rain. He looked down again. Shadow's eyes fluttered open, meeting his. The fear was fading, replaced by something quieter. Trust. Maybe even gratitude. He crouched once more, brushing wet fur from her muzzle. "You've done enough," he whispered. "Let me take it from here." Scout nestled against her side. Muffin curled by Luke's boot. Bolt, ever the sentinel, sat at the clearing's edge, watching the dark as if guarding them all. They had found him tonight. But standing there, soaked to the bone with his hands trembling over a broken creature and her fragile family, Luke wondered if maybe it was the other way around. By the time the rescue van pulled up to the Maple Hollow Animal Wellness Center, the storm had eased, leaving behind a sky heavy with clouds that refused to break. Fog drifted low around the modest brick building, its faded signs swinging gently in the wind. The world was quiet now, almost reverent, as if holding its breath for what would come next. Luke climbed out of the van, the damp weight of his uniform clinging to him like a second skin. He adjusted his collar against the chill and glanced toward the crate in the back. Shadow lay curled beneath a wool blanket, her head resting protectively across 2 tiny bodies. Scout and Muffin nestled close against her warmth, while Bolt sat at the gate, rigid and watchful, his sharp eyes following every movement. The ride had been long and wet, but Luke never left their side, wedged into the narrow space and back to keep them calm. When the doors swung open, the warm glow from the Maple Hollow Animal Wellness Center spilled across the gravel. A figure stepped out from the entrance, clipboard tucked under her arm. Tracy Miller moved with the easy stride of someone used to working in storms. Compact frame, chestnut hair twisted into a bun, boots splashed with mud, her jacket slick with the residue of 100 other nights like this. Her eyes skimmed the scene quickly, sharp but softened by a quiet compassion. "3 pups and a mom?" she asked, her tone brisk but warm. "Found them tied out in the woods," Luke said, his voice low. "She's weak but stable. Leg needs antibiotics. Infection setting in." Tracy gave a short whistle as the team slid the crate out. "Well, look at these little warriors." Scout was the first to crawl forward, nose twitching at the unfamiliar smells of safety. Muffin didn't move, tucked deep under her mother's chest, while Bolt held his ground, bristling slightly, a sentinel even here. "That one's the protector," Luke murmured, nodding toward Bolt. "Won't bite, but he's watching everything." Shadow stirred when they lifted her, amber eyes fixed on Luke as if tethered by an invisible thread. He crouched, palm brushing gently against her side. "It's okay, girl. You're safe now." Scout gave a sharp bark as if agreeing. Muffin peeked out with wide eyes, and even Bolt's stance eased, though his gaze never left the hands carrying them inside. Luke rose, boots squelching against the wet gravel. "I'll be back," he said quietly. Tracy smirked without looking up. You always say that. Difference is you mean it. Inside, the room was bright and humming with soft warmth. Blankets. A space heater in the corner. The kind of comfort that didn't erase pain but dulled its edge. Luke stayed until Shadow and the pups were settled, his reflection caught in the glass as he looked back one last time. Shadow had lowered her head, finally letting herself surrender to rest. Scout curled tight against her belly. Bolt claimed a post by the wall, still scanning like a soldier on duty. And Muffin had wandered to the middle of the room, paw batting curiously at a metal bowl, her tail giving a single wag before settling into a small, tentative rhythm. Luke smiled without meaning to, then turned and walked out into the pale light of morning. But he came back. The next day. And the next. And the one after that. On the third morning, Shadow ate again, slow and cautious, eyes never leaving Luke as he crouched close. No one else could touch her. Scout greeted him with wild yips, tail a blur of joy. Bolt, though reserved, let Luke kneel without bristling, his trust building in quiet increments. Muffin surprised everyone by exploring the lobby now, curling up in her favorite corner when visitors came. That's where she was when Penny Blanchard walked in. Penny looked like someone pulled from a faded photograph, small and wiry, white hair pinned into a neat bun beneath a broad felt hat. Her oversized coat flared with every step, her cane tapping lightly against the floor. She carried a cloth tote stuffed with towels and glass jars of homemade dog biscuits. A retired librarian turned shelter volunteer, Penny had the kind of presence that could hush a room without trying. Her voice cut clean through the soft buzz around the center. "Is this the shepherd I've been hearing about?" she asked Tracy, eyes narrowing as they swept toward the recovery room. "Came in 4 nights ago," Tracy said, nodding toward Luke. He was crouched by the crate, his hand resting on the steel frame as Shadow sniffed the air. Penny stepped closer, leaning on her cane to peer through the glass. Her breath fogged the surface. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. Luke turned at the sound. "You know her?" Penny's gaze lingered on Shadow, her brow furrowed in thought. "Not by name," she said slowly, "but I've seen her. South Trail, near the old logging road. Belonged to a man out there. Lived under a tarp shelter. Kept to himself. Quiet sort." Luke rose, pulse tightening. "What did he look like?" "Late 30s, maybe. Medium build. Dark hair. Beard. Always wore a black military jacket. Never spoke much, but he had the eyes of someone carrying ghosts." Luke held her words like fragile glass. "Did you ever get a name?" Penny nodded, the memory slipping back like a forgotten tune. "Asked him about the dog once. He said her name was Shadow. Said she'd saved him more times than he could count. Told me." She paused, her voice softening. "Told me they didn't belong to anyone. Said we belonged to each other." Luke felt the name before he heard it. "Did he tell you his?" Penny nodded again. "Eli. Eli Turner." Something thudded hard in Luke's chest, a sound only he could hear. He scribbled the name on his notepad, though it burned in his memory already. Tracy's eyes flicked between them. "You think he left her?" Luke stared through the glass where Shadow lay watching him, her amber eyes still threaded with trust. "I don't know," he said quietly. "But I intend to find out." As Penny shifted, Muffin padded across the lobby, her small frame brushing gently against the older woman's legs. Penny glanced down, surprised, as the pups sat neatly at her feet. "Well now," she murmured with a faint smile. "Aren't you the polite one?" Tracy chuckled. "She does that every time you come in. Think she likes your cane." Luke watched them both, his hands buried in his pockets. "Or maybe," he said softly, his eyes never leaving Shadow, "she just knows who she can trust." Luke lingered too, his boots sunk deep in the damp soil as his gaze swept the blackened skeleton of the camp. The wind whispered through the pines like an echo of someone long gone. Shadow didn't move at first. She stood near the ashes, head low, her breath rising in soft white curls against the gray morning. Then, without a sound, she turned and padded slowly toward him, pressing her muzzle into his palm as if to say what neither of them could. Luke curled his fingers gently under her jaw. "We'll find him," he murmured, his voice barely a thread in the hush of the forest. "Promise." He opened the cruiser door, and Shadow climbed in with a quiet grace, settling where the pups were already nestled. Scout curled into her belly immediately, Bolt sitting close enough to shield them, and Muffin tucked her small frame between them all, tail flicking once before she stilled. Luke stood there a moment longer, hand on the edge of the door, staring back at the ruin in the trees. Nate slung the evidence pouch into the front seat. "You think he's out there?" he asked. Luke didn't answer right away. His eyes traced the trail that vanished into the woods, into shadows that seemed deeper now, like secrets refusing to be forgotten. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but low. "If he is, we're bringing him home." The doors shut with a dull thud. The cruiser rolled down the service road, tires spitting gravel as the forest swallowed the clearing behind them. And for a long stretch of gray silence, the only sound was the steady rhythm of rain beginning to fall against the roof, a quiet promise of what still waited beyond the map's red X. She watched Luke the entire time, as if she knew the weight of what he carried, as if the faint slip of paper in his hand could change everything. The number stared back at him like a lifeline, like a whisper that said Eli Turner wasn't just a ghost in the woods, not yet. The cruiser rolled past the last sign of town, and into the stretch of road where the trees arched overhead like darkened cathedral walls. Every mile felt heavier, and yet, hopeful. Luke gripped the wheel, eyes locked ahead, but his mind was a storm of questions. Who was L. Darnell? Why leave just a name, no address, no plea beyond those broken words? Maybe because he didn't want to be found. Or maybe because, deep down, he did? In the back seat, Shadow's gaze never left him. She sat perfectly still, the pups curled into her warmth, breathing soft and steady. Every so often, her ears twitched like she was listening to something Luke couldn't hear, something beyond the hum of the tires and the low growl of the engine. The sun bled into the horizon, staining the clouds in shades of ember and ash as the road bent toward Hollow Creek. A town worn to the bone, where old steel mills sat hollow and silent like the shells of giants. Luke pulled the cruiser to a stop near an abandoned rail yard, killed the engine, and sat in the stillness. For a long time, he didn't move. His fingers traced the edge of the note like it was a prayer. He could almost hear Eli's voice in those words, rough, weary, clinging to something fragile. Maybe guilt. Maybe hope. Luke didn't know which one burned deeper. All he knew was this: the man had left a trail, and trails were meant to be followed. Shadow shifted then, pressing her nose gently against his shoulder, grounding him in the moment. He turned, met those amber eyes that had seen both fire and survival, and for the first time in hours he breathed. Really breathed. The phone felt heavy in his palm as he dialed, each tone loud in the hush of dusk. On the fourth ring, a voice answered. Low. Guarded. Who's this? Luke's grip tightened. My name's Luke Marshall. I think you knew a man named Eli Turner. A pause. Silence so thick it pressed against his chest. Then a breath on the other end, slow and deliberate. If you've got his dog, the voice said, we need to talk. The line clicked dead, but Luke didn't need directions. He already knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He glanced back at Shadow, and in her steady, unwavering eyes he saw the truth. This wasn't just about finding Eli. It was about finishing what he started. And somewhere beyond the gray horizon, someone was waiting. Luke Marshall pulled the cruiser to a stop at the end of an abandoned gravel path, where a rusted bus stop leaned against time and silence. No bus had come through here in years. Inside the shelter, a man sat hunched like a shadow of his former self, arms wrapped tightly around his ribs as if trying to hold himself together. Eli Turner. He looked nothing like the man Luke remembered. His body had thinned to sharp edges, his skin pale and streaked with dirt, and his hair, long and gray in places, hung like a curtain over a hollow face. His eyes, green once fierce and alive, now stared blankly into a distance no one else could see. Luke moved carefully, his boots crunching against gravel. He didn't want to startle him. "Eli," he said softly. It took a moment for Eli to blink, as though his mind had been far away and only now found its way back. His lips moved before sound came out, his voice a cracked whisper. "Why?" Luke didn't answer with words. He just turned slightly, and from behind the cruiser came movement, small, fast, alive. Scout appeared first, tail stiff, ears high, then launched himself toward Eli like a streak of fur and joy. The man flinched, arms tightening as if to defend himself, but Scout didn't stop. He leapt into Eli's lap, licking his face with the desperate happiness of a dog who has waited far too long. Before Eli could react, another shape approached, Muffin, limping slightly, tongue dangling, eyes soft with devotion. He reached Eli and pressed his nose gently into the man's trembling hand. Then came Bolt, bigger than the others, circling once before settling at Eli's back like a silent guardian. Eli's hands hovered in the air, unsure, until gravity and grief pulled them down into warm fur. His breath hitched. "No," he murmured, shaking his head. "They're gone." Luke swallowed. "They're here, Eli." But it wasn't over yet. From the trees, another figure appeared, moving slowly, carrying the weight of years. Her coat, once deep sable-streaked with silver, was dulled by time. She walked with a limp, but her eyes, those dark, unwavering eyes, fixed on him with the kind of recognition that steals the breath from your chest. "Shadow." Eli froze, every muscle rigid. His mouth opened, but the words that came were broken fragments. No, I let her go. I had to." Shadow stopped a few feet away, hesitating. Eli's voice cracked like something splitting open. "I was afraid," he whispered. "That night, I blacked out. I was screaming, shaking so hard I couldn't breathe. She wouldn't leave me. And I thought if she stayed, I'd destroy her too." His head bowed, his voice barely a thread. "So I tied her to that tree. Left a note. Prayed someone would find her before the rain did." His hands covered his face. "I walked away because I loved her too much to kill her spirit." Shadow stepped forward then, slow but certain, and pressed her muzzle into his chest. Eli shattered. His knees hit the ground, arms wrapping around her neck as a sound ripped from him, a raw, wordless sob years in the making. Scout barked sharply, then wriggled into the hug. Muffin rested his chin on Eli's knee, and Bolt sat still, a sentry of loyalty. No one spoke. Not Luke. Not Eli. The silence between man and dog was thick with something words could never touch: grace, forgiveness, the fragile return of a broken soul. The sky opened gently, releasing a soft rain that washed over them like a blessing. It wasn't the kind of rain that chills, it soothed, cleansing the dirt, the years, the grief. Through the clouds above Hollow Creek, a shaft of sunlight broke free, stretching across the earth like a promise. Later, when Luke helped Eli into the cruiser, Eli paused, his voice unsteady. "Do you think," he swallowed, "redemption can come on 4 legs?" Luke smiled faintly. "Sometimes," he said. "It's the only kind that stays." Morning came to Maple Hollow like a quiet miracle. Golden light slipped through pine needles and kissed dew-soaked grass. The clouds had scattered, leaving a sky the color of hope. Outside the town's old barn, now a shelter that smelled of life more than loss, Eli Turner stood under the overhang, the sun glinting off hair trimmed short and neat. The haunted look in his eyes had softened, though a shadow lingered, perhaps it always would. But he carried himself differently now, not folded inward but standing rooted steady. He wore a gray hoodie, worn jeans, boots muddy from the paddock. In one hand a red whistle. In the other, a clipboard covered in notes. He looked like the man he used to be, a trainer with purpose, not a ghost haunted by silence. Out in the open field, Luke leaned on a fence, arms crossed, watching with quiet pride. "You look good out there," he called. Eli nodded, eyes following the dogs bounding across the grass. "I feel steady." It had been a month since Luke drove him back to town. A month of rebuilding, one breath at a time. Shadow had been his anchor through the worst nights, her old bones carrying more strength than Eli thought possible. And then came that day, when Scout walked calmly beside a boy who hadn't spoken in weeks, a boy trembling from a world too loud. Something inside Eli broke open in that moment, and the vision came. Now, the program had a name: Veterans and K-9 Companions. Its first class had begun, a handful of dogs, a few veterans from nearby towns, and a grant Luke managed to pull together. A promise that healing didn't have to be solitary. That salvation could come on 4 legs, just like redemption. Under the shade of a maple tree, Shadow lay quietly, her silvered coat dulled by years, her eyes still sharp. She didn't bark much anymore. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was enough to keep the pups in line and the humans tethered to something steady. On the field, a small circle of lives had gathered for today's session, a couple of war veterans hardened by years and ghosts, a teenage boy who carried the memory of fire in his eyes, and Denise, a woman rebuilding herself from the inside out. She sat cross-legged in the grass, her copper-red hair tied in a severe knot, pale blue eyes flicking nervously at every sound. But today, for the first time, there was a curve at the edge of her mouth. A faint smile. Scout had seen to that. The little German shepherd pup, smallest of the 3 but sharp as a blade, had claimed her without hesitation. 9 months old now, still all paws and eager eyes, yet he had a gift, a sense for souls that trembled. He nudged her palm gently, then curled against her side like he'd been waiting for this exact moment all his life. Eli watched from a distance, quiet, hands in his pockets. Nearby, a sharp whistle cracked the air as Bolt sprinted toward Nate Owens, who stood like a boulder in the field, broad-chested, barrel-laughed, hair clipped so neat it looked carved. Nate had caved 2 weeks ago and signed the papers to make Bolt his. There was no resisting that whirlwind of muscle and energy. "Come!" Nate barked, and Bolt answered like lightning, streaking across the grass with a tail like a flag in battle. He stopped on a dime at Nate's boots and dropped into a flawless sit. Nate grinned, tossing a liver treat. "You're going to be a legend," he said. "We'll have you sniffing out more than donuts in no time." Muffin, sweet clumsy Muffin, plodded up beside Eli and sat, lopsided ears twitching, eyes full of nothing but devotion. He hadn't left Eli's shadow since that day at the bus stop. At night, he slept by the bed. By day, he became the quiet heart of therapy sessions. When Denise had broken her silence during group sharing last night, it was Muffin's chin on her knee that helped pull the words out. Luke strolled over now, a folded flyer in hand, his sheriff's badge catching the sun. "State rep's coming next week," he said. "They want to feature you in the paper." Eli let out a dry laugh. "Me? I'm just the guy who was rotting at a bus stop." Luke shook his head, steady and sure. "You're the reason this exists." Eli looked back at the field, Scout nestled by Denise, Bolt dragging Nate into a tug-of-war and winning, Shadow watching from the shade like an old queen counting her subjects. Muffin leaned his head into Eli's thigh, anchoring him. "You were right," Eli murmured. Luke tilted his head. "They're not just dogs." Luke's voice was soft, certain. "They're family." Inside the barn, a new world had taken shape. Mats stretched across the floor, walls lined with posters teaching the language of trust, both human and canine. Above one corner hung a tile with Shadow's paw print pressed into clay, for simple words etched beneath: "Lead with loyalty." Each week, more came through the door. Some arrived shattered, others hollow. All left carrying a little more light than they brought in. Today, Eli stood in the center of the ring, whistle at his lips, guiding Scout as he demonstrated a perfect heel for a newcomer. Denise stood close, asking questions now, voice stronger. Nate slapped high fives with another veteran. A boy from the youth shelter laughed as Muffin dropped a slobbery chew toy at his feet. And in the corner, Shadow watched. Her coat dulled by age, her eyes still sharp as steel. She didn't need to bark. Her silence spoke everything. By evening, the field glowed under a sky of fire and gold. Eli sat on the porch steps, Shadow curled at his feet, while Luke leaned against a post beside him. Scout, Bolt, and Muffin tumbled through the grass, all teeth and joy. "Feels like this place was always meant for them," Eli said quietly. Luke's gaze slid sideways. "And for you?" Eli scratched behind Shadow's ear, his voice low. "No. It was meant for us." The quiet that followed was deep and full, the kind of silence that feels like a heartbeat. For the first time in years, Eli Turner wasn't drifting. He was home. The seasons turned, and sunlight spilled across a new wooden sign at the gate, letters carved bold against warm cedar, Shepherd's Haven. Beneath it the words, "A place where healing walks on four legs." On the day of the grand opening, the field buzzed with life, rows of folding chairs, paper streamers snapping in the wind, veterans in worn boots, families with bright-eyed kids, volunteers bustling, laughter threading through the air. Luke stood near the edge of the crowd, stiff in a pressed shirt and polished boots, scratching at his collar like it itched. Cameras clicked at the podium, reporters hanging on the councilwoman's final words, but Luke wasn't listening. His eyes were on the chaos of joy breaking loose on the grass. Scout weaving between legs like a bullet, Bolt soaring over a makeshift agility bar, Muffin lumbering after them with that lazy grin and flopping ears. And then came the laughter, a sound that sliced through the crowd, bright as bells. Luke turned and saw her, a little girl in a sunflower yellow dress too big for her small frame, sneakers scuffed and scribbled with stars. Lacey. The kid who'd walked into his life 3 months ago from a foster home where hope was in short supply. Hair like a storm of curls, spirit fierce enough to survive what most wouldn't. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her words were careful, precious things. Now, she was running across the field, chasing Muffin, her laughter spilling like sunlight as the dog galloped ahead, tail whipping the wind. And for Luke, for Eli, for everyone gathered there, this wasn't just a program anymore. It was proof. Proof that some wounds don't close on their own. That sometimes, redemption comes on 4 legs, wagging its tail like it never left. Now she darted after Muffin in wild zigzags, her laughter spilling across the grass like music carried on the wind. Muffin raced ahead, ears flopping, tongue lolling, then spun and circled back as if teasing her to try harder. He'd become her shadow, never straying far, curling at her side at night, padding after her through every therapy session, and giving a single sharp bark whenever a sudden noise made her flinch. Near the stage, Nate Owens tugged at the strap of Bolt's vest, adjusting it until the white letters gleamed against navy blue, K-9 officer in training. Nate was the same as always, shirt half untucked, hair flattened like he'd slept on it wrong, but grinning like a kid as he ruffled Bolt's head. "Not bad for a mutt, huh?" Bolt barked once, tail wagging like a flag, then trotted off toward the cluster of kids near the entrance. That's where Scout had taken charge, leading his own little tour group like a 4-legged guide. He darted between signs painted with paw prints, stopping at every stop on the path, the memorial stone, the garden of hanging dog tags, the big windows where therapy rooms glowed with soft light. Every time the kids wandered off, Scout snapped back with a sharp bark, herding them into place like a teacher ringing the recess bell. It was funny, it was sweet, it was perfect. The MC's voice cut through the hum of chatter, calling Luke's name. Applause swelled as he stepped forward, waving it off with an awkward smile. The mic wobbled when he gripped it, and he steadied it with one hand, clearing his throat. "I don't deserve this," he began, voice low and honest. "I just followed the barking." Laughter rippled through the crowd, warm and real. "I followed a sound in the woods that night," Luke continued, eyes drifting toward the far edge of the field. "And it led me here, to Shadow, to her pups, to Eli, to all of you, and now to Lacey." The little girl froze when she heard her name, blinking once before running forward, a streak of yellow in the sunlight. Muffin bounded after her, sitting firm at her feet like a bodyguard. "They saved me," Luke said, his voice softening. "Every bark, every step, it was pulling me towards something I didn't even know I was missing." In the front row, Eli sat on a stone bench, a notebook resting across his knees. His beard was trimmed now, his frame still lean but strong. He wore an olive green shirt rolled at the sleeves, looking every bit the man who had found his footing again. At his side, Shadow lay in the grass, aged now, her muzzle silvered, her breath slower, but her eyes alive, calm and proud as they tracked the children tearing through the field. Eli's hand slid over her head, fingers threading gently through the fur that had carried him back to life. "You did good, girl," he whispered. A breeze lifted through the trees, teasing the ribbon tied at the shelter doors. Then came the snip of scissors, and applause roared like a river breaking free. Shepherd's Haven wasn't a dream anymore. It was a home. By afternoon, the field was a living thing, therapy dogs tumbling through grass, veterans trading stories over plates of barbecue, children chalking bright paw prints across the sidewalks like confetti. Eli stood with a cluster of young soldiers from the VA, explaining in a voice steady and sure the steps of building trust between a broken man and the animal who saves him. Shadow leaned against his leg, her presence anchoring him the way she always had. Inside, Luke carried Lacey as her laughter gave way to yawns, her arms looped tight around his neck like roots clinging to soil. She was light as air, but what she carried wasn't the weight of trust, of hope creeping back in where darkness had lived too long. Behind him, Scout nosed open a door for a group eager to see the kennelwing. Bolt barked furiously at a balloon tangled in a tree, and Muffin sprawled under the bench where Lacey would soon nap in a sunbeam. Dusk came draped in gold, painting the sign at the gate in amber light. Luke stood by the fence line, eyes sweeping the hills, when a bark cut through the hush. He turned. Shadow was there, sitting with the patience of time itself, Eli's hand resting on her back. Their eyes met his, and words weren't needed. A nod passed between them, carrying everything that mattered. A bark had led them all here. To this place, to this moment. And for the first time in years, every step had a reason, every soul had a place to belong. Sometimes grace doesn't come with thunder or lightning. Sometimes it slips in quietly, on padded paws, in the laughter of a child, in the loyalty of a dog who never stopped believing. This was never just about saving a soldier or a dog. It was about a broken man, an abandoned animal, and a little girl who all found each other, not by luck, but by something greater, a mercy that whispers, "You are not alone." If you've ever felt forgotten, if you've ever believed your story ended where the pain began, remember this: the author isn't done yet. And maybe, just maybe, the next chapter walks toward you on four legs.